My unemployed husband wasted our $14,000 home savings on toys while I worked endless nurse shifts. I offloaded his entire collection at 50% off. What do you do when the man you love, the man you vowed to build a future with, turns out to be a deceitful, toy-obsessed child who empties your bank account? You sell his entire collection for cash, that's what. And then you watch him scream. Trust me, it's a story you won't want to miss. It all started about 8 months ago. My husband, Brandon, lost his job at the warehouse. It was tough, but we'd been married for 6 years, and I truly believed we were a team. When I was in nursing school, he carried us financially. Now it was my turn. I told him, honey, don't worry. My nurse salary can cover us while you find something new. We'll be fine. I really meant it. That first month, he was actually pretty motivated. Updating his resume, going to interviews, networking. I felt optimistic. But by month 3, something shifted. He discovered online auctions. Vintage toy collecting. It started small, innocent enough. $20 action figures, he'd say, these are investments. They'll triple in value. I didn't mind. I figured he needed something to keep his mind busy between applications. Then, the packages started arriving. Daily. $50 limited editions. $100 rare finds. $200 mint condition sets, still in plastic. My stomach would drop a little each time I saw another one on the porch. I asked him, Brandon, where is this money coming from? He'd shrug, oh, I'm selling old stuff from storage. But we didn't have anything in storage. My gut told me something was wrong. Turns out, my gut was right. He'd been secretly transferring money from our joint savings account to his personal PayPal. Our joint savings. The money we were putting aside for a down payment on a house. When I confronted him, his eyes went wide and he said, babe, it's an investment. These toys will be worth thousands in a few years. My blood boiled. I was pulling grueling 12-hour shifts at the hospital, running myself ragged, while he was sitting at home, bidding on plastic robots. It was infuriating. That was the first line I drew. I separated our finances. I gave him a small allowance, just enough for gas and food while he was supposedly job hunting. That lasted exactly 1 week. 1 week. My next credit card statement showed a $900 charge to some obscure collectible shop in Japan. He'd memorized my card number. My personal card number. When I confronted him again, he had the audacity to call me controlling. He said I was unsupportive of his business venture. His business venture of buying toys while I paid for literally everything. I saw red. I canceled that card on the spot and got a new one, which I kept hidden. Then he pulled the ultimate betrayal. My mom called me, sounding confused and worried. Sweetheart, why do you need $3,000? My heart sank. Brandon had called her, crying, telling her some sob story about how my hours had been cut, and we were behind on bills, and could she loan us money, just this once. My hours hadn't been cut. They'd been increased to overtime. Mom, bless her heart, had already sent him the money through Zelle. He bought a limited edition train set with it. Signed by some designer I'd never even heard of. This was beyond a problem. This was a crisis. My sister, Rita, works at our bank. I called her, sobbing, and she pulled some strings. She traced where all our money was going. The number chilled me to the bone. Brandon had spent $14,000 in just 4 months on toys. $14,000. That was our house down payment, gone. Meanwhile, he'd gone to exactly 2 job interviews. 2. Both at places he knew wouldn't hire him because he showed up in sweats. That was it. I was done. Rita helped me open a new account at a different bank, rerouting my direct deposit. Brandon didn't even notice for 3 weeks. Why? Because he was too busy arranging his ever-growing collection in our spare room. It no longer looked like a spare room. It looked like a toy store exploded. He'd installed special shelving, custom lighting, even an $800 temperature control system to preserve the plastic. I couldn't believe it. Then, rent was due, and the joint account was empty. That's when he finally noticed. He came storming into our bedroom at midnight, right after my shift, screaming, "Where's my investment fund?" I just looked at him. That was my money, I said, my voice dangerously calm, for bills. He puffed out his chest. We're partners. Partners share everything. I fixed him with a stare. And when was the last time you contributed to that partnership? He stammered, my collection is worth at least 30,000 now. I asked him to sell some for rent. He scoffed, you don't understand collectible markets. The value will only go up. That's when I knew. I knew what I had to do. Brandon went to a toy convention 2 hours away that weekend. He called it a networking opportunity for serious collectors. While he was gone, I made my move. I called every single person on his collector forums. I posted in all his online groups. Emergency sale. I wrote. Husband's entire collection must go immediately. 50% off market value. Cash only. Pick up today. They were vultures. And I was their facilitator. His collector friends showed up within hours, cash in hand. His prize train set? Sold for $1,500 to a dealer who confessed Brandon had outbid him for it initially. The vintage robots? Gone for $2,000 to a guy who drove 3 hours when he heard about the fire sale. Every single piece. By the time Brandon got home, I had $21,000 cash piled on our kitchen table. He walked into his toy room and just stood there, staring at the empty shelves. His jaw dropped. Then he started screaming. You robbed me. Those were priceless investments. I calmly walked over to him and handed him an envelope. Inside were 2 things. First and last month's rent for a studio apartment across town, and a printed list of job openings. You have 2 hours, I told him, my voice steady, to pack your clothes. He called the police, trying to report a theft. A nice officer showed up. I explained the entire situation, showing him my bank statements, my pay stubs, the evidence of Brandon's spending. The officer turned to Brandon, flatly stating that marital assets can be sold by either spouse, and suggested he focus on finding employment. Brandon stood there, deflated, as the officer left. His mom called me, screaming every name in the book. I didn't yell back. I just sent her copies of the bank statements, showing what her unemployed son had spent on plastic toys while I worked overtime just to keep us afloat. She went silent really fast. Brandon tried to contest the divorce, claiming I'd destroyed his business assets. The judge, a stern but fair woman, asked for his business license, tax records, any proof of income from this toy business. He had nothing. No license, no tax records, no proof he'd ever sold a single toy or made $1 from his supposed investment venture. The judge stared at him for what felt like an eternity before asking, are you seriously claiming that buying toys with your wife's money counts as running a business? Brandon started stammering about market research and networking, but she cut him off. Motion denied. Court will proceed as scheduled. I watched Brandon's face turn bright red as the reality hit him. His lawyer looked utterly exhausted. Walking out of that courthouse, into the bright afternoon sun, I felt something lift off my shoulders. Something heavy that had been weighing me down for months. Brandon started yelling behind me in the parking lot, screaming about how I'd destroyed his life, stolen his future. His lawyer physically grabbed his arm, trying to pull him toward their car while Brandon kept screaming, calling me a thief and a liar. I just unlocked my car, got in, locked the doors, started the engine, backed out slowly, watching in my rearview mirror as his lawyer tried to calm him down like a wild animal. That evening, as I was heating up leftover pasta, my phone rang. It was Rita. She asked how court went. I told her about the judge's reaction to Brandon's business claims. She laughed, a genuine, joyful laugh, and then said, "Oh, I have something to tell you." Turns out, she'd been monitoring credit applications. She had a feeling Brandon would try something. He'd attempted to open 3 new credit cards in the past week, all using our old joint address. Rita, my amazing sister, had already flagged all of them with fraud alerts and contacted the credit bureaus to protect my score. I thanked her profusely. She just said, "Stop it. That's what sisters do." She also set up alerts on my credit report, so I'd know immediately if anyone tried to open anything in my name. The next morning at the hospital, I was restocking supplies. My supervisor walked in, stopped, and looked at me. Everything okay at home? She asked softly. You seem different lately. I told her I was getting divorced. She hugged me immediately. It surprised me because she's usually all business. She pulled back, her eyes kind. I could tell something had been draining you these past few months. You looked exhausted beyond just the physical demands of the job. I'm glad you're taking care of yourself. That conversation stayed with me. It made me realize how much my marriage problems had been affecting my work without me even noticing. My mom called the next afternoon. She sounded annoyed. Brandon's mom had just called her, trying to negotiate some kind of settlement where I'd give Brandon half the money from selling his toys. My mom, bless her, laughed out loud. She told Brandon's mom that he was lucky I didn't sell everything at 25% off instead of 50%. Brandon's mom tried to argue I destroyed valuable property. My mom just asked her if she'd seen the bank statements showing what her unemployed son spent while I worked overtime. The line went quiet. Brandon's mom hung up. My mom told me she was proud of me for not backing down, that too many women stay in situations like mine because they feel guilty or responsible. That evening, I logged into my bank account. I looked at the credit card balances Brandon had run up before I caught him. 3 cards, a combined total of almost $8,000, all from his toy purchases. I'd been making minimum payments for months, watching the interest pile up while trying to cover rent and bills. I used some of the money from the toy sale to pay off all 3 cards in full. Watching those balances change to zero felt better than I expected. Like erasing evidence of his financial abuse, one payment at a time. I checked my savings account after that and saw it was actually growing again, instead of shrinking. First time in months I'd seen that number go up. 2 weeks went by without a word from Brandon. I was finishing up a shift at the hospital, charting notes at the nurse's station, when security called. Do you know a Brandon Miller? My stomach dropped. He's my estranged husband, I said, and I don't want to see him. The guard said he was in the lobby, getting agitated. I explained the situation. 2 officers went down to escort him out. 10 minutes later, they called back, confirming he'd left and asking if I wanted them to flag him in their system. Yes, I said, my hands shaking. Please. One of my coworkers saw me, asked if I was okay. I told her what happened. She suggested I talk to the hospital social worker about a restraining order. The next day, on my lunch break, I met with her. She listened to everything. Brandon showing up at my workplace, his behavior at the courthouse, his constant attempts to contact me. She took notes. His pattern of behavior was concerning, she said. I should definitely consider legal protection. She gave me the name of a lawyer specializing in restraining orders. I called during my next break and got an appointment 2 days later. The lawyer reviewed all the documentation, bank statements, the police report from when Brandon tried to report the toy sale as theft, the security report from the hospital. You have a strong case for harassment, she said. We can file for a temporary restraining order today. Within 3 days, it was approved. The judge signed it, reviewing Brandon's pattern of showing up uninvited and his aggressive behavior. The order stated he had to stay at least 500 feet away from me, the hospital, and my mom's house, where I was staying. Violation meant immediate arrest. My lawyer called with the news, saying the paperwork would be served to Brandon at his studio apartment that afternoon. I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. I knew this would make him angry, but at least I had legal protection. That weekend, Rita called. She'd found a 1-bedroom apartment 3 blocks from the hospital. Way better security than our old place. Locked entrance, cameras, gated garage parking. And rent was actually $200 cheaper a month because I didn't need 2 bedrooms for a toy storage room. We drove over to look at it. I loved it immediately. Small but clean, updated kitchen, good water pressure in the shower. I filled out the application right there and got approved 2 days later, thanks to my steady nursing income and clean credit. Move-in date was set for 3 weeks out, giving me time to buy furniture and pack up my few things. That first week in my new apartment, I just walked around touching things. The countertops were mine. The refrigerator hummed without hiding any secret credit card bills inside. I hung my own towels in the bathroom and arranged my coffee mugs however I wanted. No worrying about leaving space for collectible boxes. The kitchen cabinets were old, and the linoleum had cracks, but nobody could take this place from me. I worked a night shift and came home at 3 in the morning to silence. Not Brandon demanding to know where I'd been or why I hadn't answered his texts. My bed was smaller than the one we'd shared, but I slept better than I had in months. The building had a coded entry system and cameras everywhere. I gave the property manager a photo of Brandon and explicit instructions. He wasn't allowed inside, under any circumstances. She made a note, promising to alert all staff. 2 days after I moved in, my phone started buzzing during a shift. Unknown number. I ignored it. 5 minutes later, it buzzed again. Different unknown number. I blocked both. By the time my break came, I had 7 missed calls from 7 different numbers. The voicemails? All Brandon. Begging me to just talk to him for 5 minutes. Swearing he understood now. He'd get a job. He'd never buy another toy. Please, just give me one more chance. I forwarded every single message to my lawyer's email with timestamps. She called back within an hour. Clear. Restraining order violation, she said. I filed the documentation. Brandon kept texting from new numbers throughout my entire shift. I blocked each one and forwarded the messages. By morning, I had a folder with 23 separate violations documented. The court date came 3 weeks later. I took the morning off and wore my nicest work clothes. Brandon showed up in jeans and a wrinkled shirt, looking like he hadn't slept. His lawyer looked tired before the hearing even started. The judge reviewed the documentation my lawyer had submitted, every text, every call, every voicemail from every different number Brandon had used. She asked Brandon if he understood what a restraining order meant. He started explaining how he just wanted to talk to his wife and work things out. The judge cut him off. She's not your wife anymore. She's a person with legal protection from your contact. She extended the restraining order for a full year and added a clause. Any further violations would result in immediate arrest and possible jail time. Brandon's lawyer didn't even try to argue. He just nodded and packed up his briefcase while Brandon sat there, staring at the table. I scheduled an appointment with the hospital's employee assistance program the next week. The therapist's office was small, with generic motivational posters on the walls. She asked me what brought me in. I started with Brandon losing his job and ended with selling his toy collection and the extended restraining order. It took 45 minutes to get through the whole story. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked how I felt. Stupid, I said. For not seeing it sooner, for making excuses, for thinking he'd change. She nodded. That's how these situations work. The behavior starts small and builds gradually until you're living in something completely different from what you signed up for. We talked about how he'd gone from $20 toys to $14,000 in 4 months. How each boundary I set was ignored until I didn't have any boundaries left. She helped me see the pattern I'd been too close to recognize. My coworkers asked if I wanted to go out for drinks after our shift that Friday. I almost said no out of habit. I was used to rushing home to deal with whatever Brandon's latest crisis was. Then I remembered. I didn't have to do that anymore. We went to a bar 3 blocks from the hospital with cheap wings and cheaper beer. I sat in a booth with 4 other nurses, and we talked about everything except work. Someone told a story about their terrible first apartment. Someone else complained about their mother-in-law. I realized I hadn't done this in months, maybe longer. Every time my coworkers had invited me out, I'd made excuses because I needed to get home, or I was too tired from picking up extra shifts to cover his toy purchases. Sitting there, laughing at stupid jokes and eating wings, felt like something I'd forgotten I was allowed to do. Rita called me the next week and said her friend, Sakura Tanaka, wanted to meet me. Sakura had gone through a similar divorce 2 years ago. We met at a coffee shop near the hospital. Sakura was a teacher, and she looked put together in a way that made me feel hopeful. She told me about her ex-husband, who'd gambled away their savings and lied about it for months. She talked about the shame she felt admitting her marriage was falling apart and how long it took her to trust her own judgment again. I told her about the toys and the restraining order and feeling stupid for not leaving sooner. She said she'd felt the same way, but eventually realized that leaving when you're ready is better than staying because you're scared. We talked for 2 hours and exchanged numbers. She said to text her anytime I needed someone who understood this kind of mess. The following Monday, I walked into a completely different bank. Opened a new savings account. The banker asked what it was for. A house down payment, I said. She helped me set up automatic transfers from each paycheck. $50 at first, then I changed it to $100. I logged into the account every few days just to watch the balance grow. Every deposit felt like taking back something Brandon had stolen. The numbers climbed slowly, but they climbed. And nobody could access this account except me. No joint ownership, no shared passwords, no way for anyone to transfer money out without my explicit permission. I added an extra security question and two-factor authentication. This money was mine, and it was staying mine. My lawyer called 3 months after I sold the toy collection. Brandon's lawyer had contacted her with a settlement offer. Brandon would drop all claims to the money from the toy sale if I agreed not to pursue him for the debt he'd created. I didn't even need to think about it. Yes, I told my lawyer immediately. She said she'd draw up the paperwork, and everything should be finalized within a few weeks. The divorce could be done by the end of the month if Brandon didn't change his mind. I hung up and sat in my apartment, feeling lighter than I had since the day I found out about the $14,000. The divorce finalized exactly 3 months and 2 weeks after I sold Brandon's collection. I took the day off work, and Rita drove me to the courthouse. We sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes while I tried to calm my nerves. Rita reminded me this was a good thing. I was about to be legally free from someone who'd spent our future on plastic toys. We walked in together and met my lawyer. Brandon was already there. He looked thinner, tired. The judge reviewed the settlement, confirmed we both agreed to the terms, and signed the decree. It took less than 15 minutes. I walked out with a folder containing my divorce papers and Rita's arm around my shoulders. Rita took me to lunch at a restaurant downtown with fancy cocktails and small portions. We ordered drinks that cost more than my usual grocery budget. Rita raised her glass. "To you," she said, "for getting out and starting over." I clinked my glass against hers and took a drink that tasted like freedom mixed with expensive vodka. We ordered appetizers and dessert, and I didn't worry about the cost. I had money in my account that was mine. No toy purchases pending, no secret spending to discover. Just my paycheck going toward my life. Rita paid the bill. "My treat," she said, "for surviving the worst year of your life and coming out stronger." 2 weeks after the divorce, I walked into a tattoo shop. The artist was a woman with purple hair and sleeve tattoos. I showed her the word I wanted on my wrist. Enough. She asked if I was sure about the placement. Wrist tattoos hurt more than people expect. I was sure. The needle buzzed and stung as she worked the letters into my skin. Enough. Simple black script. She bandaged it, gave me care instructions. I paid cash and walked out feeling like I'd marked something important on my body. Every time I looked at my wrist now, I'd remember that I didn't have to stay in situations that hurt me. Rita called that evening, asking if I'd seen the Facebook message from Brandon's mom. I hadn't checked Facebook in weeks. Rita read it to me over the phone. Brandon's mom wanted to meet for coffee to discuss reconciliation. She said Brandon had learned his lesson and was ready to be a better husband. I opened Facebook on my laptop and stared at the message. 3 paragraphs about second chances and how divorce was too extreme. I clicked the block button without responding. Rita asked what I did. I told her. "Good," she said. "You don't owe anyone an explanation." The relief felt immediate. I blocked Brandon's whole family one by one. Felt lighter with each click. The next week, my supervisor posted the holiday shift schedule. Most nurses tried to avoid working Thanksgiving and Christmas. I volunteered for both. My coworkers looked at me like I was crazy, but I actually wanted to be there. Working kept me busy, and the holiday pay was double time. I signed up for New Year's Eve, too. The extra money went straight into my savings account, slowly rebuilding my house fund. Being at the hospital felt safer than sitting alone in my apartment, thinking about previous holidays with Brandon's family. My patients needed me, and I needed the distraction. 3 weeks later, I ran into one of the toy collectors at the grocery store. He was in the cereal aisle. He recognized me. He thanked me for the deals. He said he felt bad about the situation but couldn't pass up the prices. I told him I was just glad someone was enjoying those toys. He said he'd already sold some pieces for profit and offered to split the money with me. I declined. The sale was final, I said. He looked relieved and shook my hand before walking away. The whole interaction took less than 5 minutes, but it felt like closing another door on that chapter. My therapist helped me work through the patterns I'd missed during my marriage. She pointed out how Brandon always had an excuse for not contributing equally. When he was employed, he said he deserved to spend money on himself because he worked hard. When he was unemployed, he said he needed hobbies to stay mentally healthy. Either way, his needs always came before mine. She showed me how I'd made his hobbies my financial responsibility without even realizing it. I'd paid for everything while he spent money on toys. The red flags had been there from early in our relationship, but I'd ignored them. She gave me homework, write down every time I'd made excuses for his behavior. The list filled 3 pages. Rita started coming over for dinner every Thursday night. She'd bring groceries and teach me how to cook real meals instead of the frozen stuff I lived on during my marriage. We made stir-fries, pasta dishes, chicken with vegetables. She showed me how to meal prep on my days off, so I had food ready after long shifts. We'd eat together and talk about everything I'd missed while managing Brandon's chaos. She told me about her dating life and work drama. I realized how isolated I'd become. I'd stopped seeing friends and family because I was always covering for Brandon or dealing with his latest crisis. Having my sister back in my life felt like remembering who I was before the marriage. My therapist suggested I join a divorce support group at the community center. I almost didn't go. Sitting in a circle with strangers, sharing personal stories, sounded terrible. But I forced myself to walk through the door. 8 people sat in folding chairs, drinking bad coffee from paper cups. The facilitator asked everyone to introduce themselves and share one thing they were struggling with. I said my name and admitted I felt stupid for staying in my marriage as long as I did. 3 other people nodded, said they felt the same way. Hearing their stories made me feel less alone. One woman had been married 15 years before leaving. Another guy had ignored financial abuse for a decade. We weren't stupid. We just loved people who took advantage of that love. I kept going back every week. 6 months after the divorce finalized, my supervisor called me into her office. I thought I was in trouble. Instead, she told me the charge nurse position on my floor was opening up, and she wanted me to apply. Better pay, more regular hours. She said I'd been more focused and reliable lately. I filled out the application that afternoon and got the promotion 2 weeks later. My coworkers congratulated me. I felt proud of myself for the first time in months. The new schedule meant fewer overnight shifts, more weekends off. I calculated my finances one evening at my kitchen table. I'd saved almost $8,000 since Brandon left. That was more than half of what he'd spent on toys. The math made me angry all over again when I thought about how easily he'd thrown away our future. But I also felt proud looking at the growing balance. Every dollar represented my work, my choices. Nobody was draining my accounts or lying about spending. Rita called the next week with news she'd heard through mutual friends. Brandon finally got a job at a different warehouse across town. I waited for some feeling to hit me. Nothing came. No anger, no satisfaction, no curiosity about his life. Just relief that he was someone else's problem now. I thanked Rita for telling me and changed the subject to her upcoming birthday plans. Brandon's employment status didn't matter to me anymore. He could succeed or fail, and it wouldn't touch my life. That indifference felt like the final piece of moving on. 3 days after Brandon finally moved into his warehouse job, Mom called. She asked if we could meet for coffee. Her voice sounded different, smaller somehow. I agreed to meet her at the diner near her house. She was already sitting in a booth when I arrived, hands wrapped around a mug like she needed something to hold on to. She apologized for sending Brandon that money without checking with me first. I watched her stir sugar into coffee that didn't need it as she explained how convincing he'd sounded, how worried she'd been about us struggling. I told her Brandon manipulated her the same way he manipulated me for months, making me feel guilty for wanting basic financial responsibility. She nodded. We're both smarter now about his tactics, she said. I'll never send money to anyone again without calling you directly first. We ordered pancakes neither of us really wanted and talked about other things until the conversation felt normal again. 2 weeks later, Rita convinced me to download a dating app. I spent an entire evening staring at profiles of men holding fish or posing with their cars before matching with a respiratory therapist named Noah from another hospital across town. We texted for a few days about work schedules and favorite restaurants before he suggested coffee. I said yes before I could overthink it. The date happened on a Tuesday afternoon at a cafe halfway between our hospitals. Noah showed up exactly on time, wearing scrubs from his morning shift. I realized I'd forgotten how to do this. How to sit across from someone new and make conversation that wasn't about divorce lawyers or restraining orders. He asked about my job. I gave the basic rundown of working on a cardiac floor. He talked about his work in the ICU, and we discovered we both hated the new electronic charting system our hospital networks had switched to. The conversation felt a little awkward, and I kept catching myself comparing him to Brandon, before reminding myself that was exactly what I shouldn't be doing. He ordered a second coffee, I got tea, and we talked about nothing important for another hour. Walking back to my car, I felt rusty at this whole dating thing, but also good. Like I'd remembered I was allowed to have a life outside of work and recovery. Noah texted me that evening, asking about a second date. I stared at my phone for 20 minutes before typing out a response saying I'd had a nice time, but wasn't sure I was ready for anything serious right now. He replied within minutes, saying he understood and wished me well. I felt relieved instead of disappointed and realized the date itself didn't matter as much as proving to myself I could do it. I wasn't actually ready for a relationship yet, no matter how nice Noah seemed. I needed more time to trust my own judgment about people after spending 6 years ignoring every red flag Brandon threw up. The following weekend, I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I called out sick from my Saturday shift, even though I wasn't sick, and drove 2 hours to the beach. I found a cheap hotel 6 blocks from the water that charged $60 a night and had a view of a parking lot instead of the ocean. I didn't care. I checked in, changed into jeans and a sweatshirt, and walked down to the sand. The beach was mostly empty because it was October and too cold for swimming. I took my shoes off and walked along the waterline for hours, letting the waves wash over my feet until they went numb. I bought an overpriced sandwich from a boardwalk shop and ate it, sitting on a bench, watching seagulls fight over dropped French fries. That night, I slept in the hotel bed with the window cracked open so I could hear the ocean, and I didn't think about Brandon or the divorce or anything except the sound of waves hitting the shore. Sunday morning, I walked the beach again before driving home. The whole trip cost me $200 I could have saved, but it felt worth every penny. Tuesday evening, I went back to the support group. We'd grown to 12 regular members. The facilitator asked if anyone had updates. I raised my hand. I told them about selling Brandon's entire toy collection while he was at a convention. I explained how his collector friends had shown up with cash, how I'd made $21,000 in one afternoon. How Brandon came home to empty shelves and called the police, who told him marital assets could be sold by either spouse. The whole group started laughing and then applauding. One woman, Jennifer, said I was her hero for taking such decisive action instead of letting the situation drag on. Another guy said he wished he'd thought of something similar before his ex-wife drained their accounts. The facilitator reminded everyone that what worked for me might not work for others, but that setting firm boundaries was important. I left feeling lighter than I had in weeks. That weekend, I started looking at real estate listings online. I'd been avoiding it because house hunting felt like something married couples did together, but my savings account had grown steadily, and the down payment fund was rebuilding itself. I filtered search results for starter homes and safe neighborhoods near the hospital. Nothing fancy, just something small that would be mine. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, maybe a little yard. I bookmarked 6 properties that looked promising and made notes about which ones had good school districts, even though I didn't have kids, because Rita said that mattered for resale value. Rita called me the next morning before I'd even had coffee. She was crying. I thought something terrible had happened until she said her boyfriend proposed last night at their favorite restaurant. She asked if I'd be her maid of honor, and I said yes immediately. Even though the idea of planning someone else's wedding while my own marriage dissolved felt strange, Rita had been there for me through everything with Brandon. Helping me trace the money, open new accounts, find my apartment. Planning her wedding together would be a happy distraction. She came over that evening with bridal magazines, and we spent 3 hours looking at dresses and venues and making lists of potential guests. She wanted a small ceremony in the spring with just family and close friends. I took notes and felt genuinely excited for her instead of bitter about my own situation. The following week, I met with a financial advisor Rita recommended from her bank. Olivia. Her office smelled like vanilla candles. She looked at my bank statements with the same focused expression Rita got when analyzing numbers. She helped me create a realistic budget that accounted for a mortgage payment, utilities, car insurance, and still left room for savings and emergencies. She said I was in better shape than most people my age, which felt validating after the financial chaos Brandon had created. Olivia suggested I could probably buy a house within 6 months if I kept saving at my current rate and avoided any major unexpected expenses. I left her office with a folder full of papers and a timeline that made homeownership feel real instead of impossible. My next therapy session happened 2 days later. My therapist noticed I seemed different, more settled. I told her about the beach trip, the support group, meeting with the financial advisor. She said I'd made incredible progress and suggested we start spacing out our sessions to every other week instead of weekly. I felt proud hearing that, because it meant I was doing better. I had tools now for recognizing unhealthy patterns and setting boundaries. She reminded me that setbacks were normal, and I could always come back to weekly sessions if I needed to. I scheduled my next appointment for 2 weeks out and walked to my car feeling capable of handling my own life. That Friday, I met with a mortgage broker Rita connected me with. He ran my credit report, looked at my income statements, and pre-approved me for a mortgage up to $250,000. The number felt surreal after years of struggling to save anything while Brandon spent everything on toys. I signed the pre-approval letter and called a real estate agent the broker recommended. She wanted to meet that weekend to start looking at houses. I agreed and spent the rest of the evening scrolling through listings with new eyes, knowing I could actually afford these places. Looking at properties that were completely mine to choose felt empowering in a way I hadn't expected. Every house I bookmarked represented a future I was building myself with my own money and my own choices. And nobody could take that away from me. The weekend after my mortgage meeting, an old coworker from the hospital, Jessica, texted me asking if I'd heard from Brandon lately. She said he'd reached out to her on Facebook with this long message about how he'd been going to therapy and working on himself and really needed to talk to me about making things right. Jessica wanted to know if I was open to hearing him out because he seemed really genuine and kept saying he learned so much about his behavior. I stared at my phone for a solid minute before typing back that I wasn't interested in any contact with Brandon whatsoever, and could she please not pass along any messages from him. She responded with an understanding emoji and said she'd let him know. I immediately blocked Jessica's number. I didn't trust that Brandon wouldn't keep using her as a go-between. The whole thing annoyed me more than it upset me because I'd finally gotten to a place where I wasn't thinking about him every day. And here he was, trying to worm his way back into my attention. I mentioned it to my therapist the following week. She pointed out that Brandon reaching out right when I was about to buy a house probably wasn't a coincidence. He'd always had a way of sensing when I was moving forward and trying to pull me back into his chaos. That observation stuck with me because it was true. Every time I'd made progress during our marriage, he'd created some new crisis that demanded my focus and energy. I spent the next 2 weeks looking at houses online every night after my shifts, scrolling through listings and saving the ones that seemed promising. Most were either too expensive or in neighborhoods I didn't feel safe in or needed too much work for a first-time buyer. Then, on a Tuesday morning before heading to the hospital, I found a listing that made me sit up straighter in my kitchen chair. Small brick house, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, fenced yard with mature trees, updated kitchen, and a price that was right at the top of what I'd been pre-approved for. The second bedroom was described as perfect for a home office or guest room. And I immediately thought about how nice it would be to have a space for my desk and books instead of a room full of someone else's plastic toys. The photos showed hardwood floors that needed refinishing and wallpaper in the bathroom that was definitely from the 80s, but nothing that scared me off. I called my real estate agent before my shift started and told her I wanted to see it that same day if possible. She managed to schedule a showing for 6 that evening, after the current owners got home from work. Walking through that house felt different from all the other properties I'd toured. The living room had big windows that let in tons of natural light. The kitchen had enough counter space that I could actually cook real meals instead of just reheating leftovers. The backyard was bigger than I expected, with room for a garden and a small patio area where I could put a table and chairs. The second bedroom was painted this awful shade of yellow, but I could already picture it with my desk against one wall and bookshelves on the other. A space that was mine for working or reading or whatever I wanted. My real estate agent could tell I was trying not to get too excited, but I kept going back to look at different rooms, asking questions about the roof and the furnace and when things had been replaced. She pulled up the inspection report from when the current owners bought it 3 years ago, and everything looked solid. I told her I wanted to put in an offer that night. We sat in her car outside the house and wrote up an offer for exactly the asking price, because I didn't want to risk losing it by trying to negotiate. My hands shook a little signing the paperwork because this was real money and a real commitment, and if something went wrong, I'd be stuck. But I signed everything, and my agent submitted the offer through the online system right there in the driveway. The next 36 hours were torture, waiting to hear back from the sellers. I picked up an extra shift at the hospital to keep myself distracted, but kept checking my phone every time I had a break. My agent texted me Thursday afternoon. They accepted your offer. No changes or counteroffers. I was standing in the medication room when I got the message and had to sit down on the floor because my legs went weak. Happy tears started streaming down my face. One of the other nurses found me there and thought something terrible had happened until I showed her the text message. She screamed and hugged me, and suddenly half the nursing staff knew I was buying a house. I called Rita during my lunch break, and she actually shrieked so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She started rapid-firing questions about the address and square footage and what the neighborhood was like. When I told her about the second bedroom being an office, she said that was perfect because Brandon's toy room had always creeped her out anyway. My mom called that evening after Rita told her the news and offered to help with moving expenses or furniture or whatever I needed. She kept saying how proud she was that I'd turned everything around after such a difficult year. The home inspection happened the following Tuesday. I met the inspector at the house during my day off. He was this older guy who'd been doing inspections for 30 years and had a clipboard thick with forms. I followed him around for 3 hours while he poked at things, took photos, and made notes. He found some minor issues: a loose railing on the back steps, an outlet in the bathroom that wasn't grounded properly, some weather stripping around the front door that needed replacing. The roof had about 10 years left on it. The water heater was 6 years old, not new, but not ancient either. The furnace was running fine, but he recommended getting it serviced before winter. Nothing he found was a deal breaker, but he estimated about $1,500 worth of repairs that should be addressed. I asked if any of it was urgent safety stuff, and he said no, just normal maintenance things that come with an older house. My real estate agent helped me write up a request asking the sellers to fix the railing and the outlet and replace the weather stripping before closing. I offered to handle the furnace servicing myself since that was just routine maintenance. The sellers agreed to everything within 2 days, and suddenly we were moving toward closing. Closing day arrived 3 weeks later on a Friday morning. I'd taken the whole day off work and met my real estate agent at the title company office at 9 o'clock. The room was small and beige, with a huge table covered in stacks of paper that all needed my signature. The title agent, a woman in her 50s, walked me through every single document, explaining what I was signing. My hand cramped up after the first 20 minutes from writing my name so many times. The sellers weren't there. They'd signed everything the day before and had already moved out. I signed papers about the mortgage, the title transfer, the homeowner's insurance, the property survey, and about 15 other things I stopped keeping track of. The whole process took almost 2 hours. By the end, I had a folder full of copies and a set of keys on a keychain that said, "Home Sweet Home." My real estate agent shook my hand and told me she loved seeing single women buy their own homes because it meant they were taking control of their lives. She'd handled my whole situation with such professionalism and never once made me feel judged. I walked out to my car holding those keys and just sat there for a few minutes, letting it sink in. I owned a house. My house. Nobody could take it away or spend the mortgage money on toys or make me feel guilty for wanting a stable home. Moving into the house over the next week felt like closing a book on my marriage to Brandon. Rita and her fiancé helped me load everything from my apartment into a rented truck on Saturday morning. I didn't have much furniture because Brandon had taken most of it, and I'd been living pretty minimal. Every box I unpacked in my new house was something I'd chosen and bought with my own money. The dishes were mine. The towels were mine. The furniture was mine. And nobody could sell any of it to fund some ridiculous hobby. I set up my bedroom first with a new bed frame I'd found on sale and sheets I'd picked out in colors I actually liked, instead of whatever Brandon had preferred. The second bedroom became my office, with a desk I'd bought used and a bookshelf I'd assembled myself. No temperature-controlled shelving for plastic toys, no special lighting for collectibles. Just a normal room for normal purposes. I hung pictures on the walls without asking anyone's permission and arranged my kitchen exactly how I wanted it. Everything about the house was mine to decide and mine to enjoy. Rita and her fiancé came back the following weekend to help me paint the living room. We'd picked out this warm gray color that made the room feel cozy but not dark. Her fiancé turned out to be really good at cutting in around the ceiling and corners while Rita and I rolled the main walls. We put on music and joked around and took breaks to drink lemonade on my back patio. By Sunday afternoon, the whole room was finished and looked completely different from the dingy beige it had been before. We ordered pizza for dinner and ate it sitting on my living room floor because my furniture hadn't been delivered yet. Rita looked around at the freshly painted walls and said my house already had better energy than my old apartment with Brandon ever had. Her fiancé agreed, saying the old place had always felt tense whenever he'd visited. I realized they were right. I felt relaxed in my own home for the first time in years. No tension about money. No worrying about what Brandon was buying behind my back. No walking on eggshells around his mood swings about his collection. 2 weeks after moving in, I hosted my first dinner party. People from the hospital, a few friends from my divorce support group. Everyone brought food potluck style, and we crowded into my small dining area and living room. My coworker from the cardiac unit brought this amazing pasta salad, and one of the support group women made brownies from scratch. We talked and laughed and celebrated my new house and fresh start together. Someone asked me to tell the story about selling Brandon's toy collection. And when I got to the part about him coming home to empty shelves, everyone cheered. One of the support group members said I was her inspiration for finally leaving her own financially irresponsible husband. Hearing that made me feel like maybe something good had come from all the chaos with Brandon. If my story helped even one person recognize they didn't have to tolerate financial abuse, then maybe it was worth sharing. People stayed until almost midnight. When everyone left, my house felt full of warmth and good memories instead of the cold silence I'd lived with during my marriage. My mom came over the next weekend with a housewarming gift of new kitchen towels in cheerful colors and a set of matching pot holders. She walked through every room, commenting on how nice everything looked and how proud she was of how I'd handled the whole situation with Brandon. We sat on my back patio, drinking coffee, and she admitted she'd been worried I would stay with him out of some misplaced sense of loyalty or obligation. She said watching me take control of my finances and my life had reminded her that I'd always been stronger than I gave myself credit for. I told her about Brandon trying to contact me through Jessica, and she rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. She said some people never learned, and Brandon was clearly one of them. We spent the rest of the afternoon planning where I should plant flowers in the front yard and what vegetables would grow best in my backyard garden. The following Saturday, I drove to the garden center and bought flats of petunias and marigolds for the front flower beds. I'd never really gardened before, but figured I could learn as I went. I spent the whole afternoon on my knees in the dirt, digging holes and spacing out the flowers according to the instructions on the tags. My hands got covered in soil, and my knees ached from kneeling, but it felt good to be doing physical work on something that was mine. In the backyard, I marked out a space for a vegetable garden and started turning over the soil to prepare it for planting. I'd bought tomato plants and pepper plants and some herb seedlings to start with. Nothing too complicated for a first-timer. The physical work of gardening felt therapeutic in a way I hadn't expected. Like I was literally planting roots in my new life. Every flower I put in the ground and every vegetable I planted represented something I was growing and tending and enjoying that belonged completely to me. This house, this garden, this life was mine to build however I wanted, without anyone spending my savings on toys or lying about job interviews or making me feel guilty for wanting basic financial stability. At the next support group meeting, one of the women asked me how I found the courage to do what I did with Brandon's toys. I sat there for a minute thinking about her question because courage wasn't really the right word for what I felt. I told her it wasn't courage exactly, more like reaching a point where anger outweighed fear. When you're so mad that you stop caring about the consequences, that's when you finally act. She nodded and wrote down Rita's number at the bank when I offered it. The next week, I sat down with my mortgage statement and my old rent receipts from the apartment Brandon and I shared. I pulled out my calculator and started adding up what I'd been paying versus what I pay now. My house payment came out to $847 a month, including property taxes and insurance. Our old apartment rent was $1,100 plus utilities. I stared at those numbers for a long time, feeling this weird mix of anger and relief. Brandon's toy obsession had literally been costing us an extra $250 every month while preventing us from buying a house that would have been cheaper. All those months I worked overtime, thinking we couldn't afford to buy, when really, we couldn't afford Brandon's hobby. I filed that paperwork away in my home office and went to make dinner in my kitchen that actually belonged to me. Rita's wedding happened on a Saturday in October when the weather was perfect and the leaves were changing colors. I stood up with her as maid of honor, wearing a dress she'd helped me pick out, and I felt genuinely happy watching her marry someone who treated her like an equal partner. During the reception, I caught the bouquet when she threw it, and everyone cheered. A year ago, I would have felt weird about that, like I was cursed or something. But now, I just laughed and held those flowers up like a trophy. Rita hugged me afterward and told me she was proud of how far I'd come. Her husband's family asked me about my house and my job, and nobody mentioned Brandon once. I danced with my mom and ate too much cake and drove home to my own place, feeling completely at peace with how my life turned out. A year after I sold Brandon's collection, I woke up early before a shift and made coffee. I took my mug out to the backyard and sat on the steps, watching the sunrise paint the sky orange and pink. My savings account had over $12,000 in it. My house was mine, with equity building every month. I was sleeping through the night without waking up anxious about bills or lies or what financial disaster I'd discover next. I sipped my coffee and listened to birds singing in the trees I'd planted and thought about how quiet and calm everything felt now. No packages arriving daily. No credit card surprises. No screaming matches about responsibility and partnership. Just me and my coffee and my house and my life that I built myself. I got a message through Facebook from one of the collectors who'd bought stuff from me during that emergency sale. He thanked me again and said some of the pieces he got had increased in value since then. He'd just sold one of the robot figures for 3 times what he'd paid me. I laughed out loud reading that message because Brandon had been right about one thing. Those toys did go up in value. But he was completely wrong about everything else that mattered. Wrong about priorities. Wrong about partnership. Wrong about what it meant to be a responsible adult. That collector got the investment returns because he had the money to sit on collectibles. Brandon spent our future on plastic and expected me to be grateful for his business sense. My therapist told me during our session that we were approaching a good stopping point. I'd been seeing her for 18 months and we'd worked through so much of the damage from my marriage. She said I'd done incredible work healing and rebuilding my life, and I should be proud of my growth. We scheduled one final session for the following month to wrap things up properly. Walking out of her office, I felt this sense of accomplishment that was different from other achievements. This wasn't about a promotion or buying a house. This was about fixing the broken parts inside myself that had let Brandon's behavior continue for so long. I'd learned to trust my own judgment again and set boundaries that actually meant something. A new nurse started on my floor who reminded me of myself 2 years ago. She was always tired, always stressed about money. And she had this boyfriend who showed up sometimes to pick her up from shifts. I noticed she'd pay for his gas and his food when they went out. I noticed she made excuses when he didn't have rent money again. One day in the break room, I asked her if everything was okay at home. She started crying and told me about her boyfriend's spending and his promises to change and how she felt trapped. I shared my story carefully, not all the details, but enough that she understood I'd been where she was. I gave her resources, including Rita's number at the bank and the name of my therapist. I told her she deserved a partner, not a dependent. She hugged me and thanked me, and I hoped she'd make better choices faster than I did. An email showed up in my inbox forwarded from my old address that I'd abandoned after the divorce. Brandon had sent it to that old email, saying he was sorry for everything and hoped I was doing well. He said he had a steady job now and was doing better. He hoped we could talk sometime if I was open to it. I read it twice and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no curiosity about his life now. Just complete indifference, like he was a stranger who'd once lived in my house. I deleted the email without responding and went back to planning my grocery list. Some people don't deserve your energy or your attention, and Brandon had used up his lifetime supply of both. Thanksgiving came, and I hosted it at my house for the first time. Rita and her husband came with homemade rolls. My mom brought her famous green bean casserole and pumpkin pie. 3 of my coworkers from the hospital joined us with various dishes and wine. We crowded around my dining table that I'd bought at an estate sale and refinished myself. I looked at all these faces of people I loved and trusted and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Nobody here was hiding financial disasters or lying about job searches or manipulating anyone into paying their way. These were real relationships, built on honesty and mutual respect. We ate until we were stuffed and played card games and laughed until my sides hurt. After everyone left and I was cleaning up the kitchen, I felt more thankful than I had in years. The bank sent me a refinance offer in the mail with a better interest rate than my original mortgage. I called them, went through the application process, and got approved within 2 weeks. The loan officer commented on my excellent payment history and credit score during our final meeting. I signed the new paperwork and my monthly payment dropped by almost $60. I thought about how Rita had helped me rebuild what Brandon damaged, and now I was thriving. My credit score was higher than it had ever been. My savings were healthy. My house was appreciating in value. I had stability and security that I'd built completely on my own, without anyone undermining it or stealing from it or treating it like their personal fund for toys. 2 years later, I'm sitting across from Noah at a coffee shop near the hospital where we both work. He's a physical therapist who transferred from another facility 6 months ago, and we started talking in the break room about hiking trails and meal prep recipes. He asked me out 3 times before I finally said yes, because I kept finding reasons to be suspicious, even though he'd never given me one. Our first date was coffee and a walk through the park, where he told me about his 2 rescue dogs and his woodworking hobby. He showed me pictures of a bookshelf he'd built for his sister and talked about his job with genuine enthusiasm. On our second date, he paid for dinner without making a big deal about it and didn't get weird when I offered to split the bill. By the 3rd date, I realized I was looking for red flags that didn't exist and trying to protect myself from problems that weren't there. Noah has a steady income, contributes to his retirement account, and his apartment is clean without being obsessive about it. He has hobbies that don't cost thousands of dollars, and he's never once asked me for money or made his problems mine to solve. We take things slow because I'm careful now about who I let into my life and my house. He hasn't even been inside my place yet because I need to be sure before I share that space with anyone. But it feels right in a way that's hard to explain. Like dating someone who actually has their life together isn't supposed to be this easy. My house appraisal came back last month, showing the value increased by almost $30,000 since I bought it. The neighborhood improved with new shops and a park renovation. Suddenly, my little two-bedroom is worth more than I paid. My savings account has enough in it that if my car died tomorrow or I needed emergency dental work, I wouldn't panic about how to pay for it. I can cover 6 months of expenses without touching my retirement. And that number keeps growing every time I get paid. Sitting in my kitchen last week, looking at my bank statements, I realized how much constant stress I lived with during my marriage. Every single day was worrying about what Brandon spent or what bill he forgot or what lie he told to get more money. I was working overtime just to stay even while he drained everything I earned into his toy collection. Now I work my regular shifts and pick up extra hours when I want to, not because I have to. The financial security feels almost strange because I'm not used to having breathing room or options or the ability to just exist without crisis. My phone buzzes while I'm chopping vegetables for dinner, and it's a text from an unknown number. I almost delete it without reading, but something makes me open it. The message says it's Brandon, and he heard I sold his collection, and he wants to know if I kept records of who bought what because he wants to buy some pieces back. He says he has money now from his job, and he's been thinking about his collection, and maybe we could talk about it. I stare at the message for about 5 seconds before I block the number and go back to slicing bell peppers. Brandon doesn't get access to my time or my energy or any information about my life anymore. Those toys are gone and scattered to whatever collectors bought them. And that's exactly what should have happened 2 years ago. I finish making stir-fry in my peaceful kitchen where nobody's going to come home and complain about what I'm cooking or ignore me to look at auction sites. Standing in my living room after dinner with a glass of wine, I look around at the life I built from the wreckage of my marriage. The furniture I picked out, the paint colors I chose, the mortgage I pay on time every month. I worked hard for this, made tough choices that hurt at the time, and created something stable that belongs completely to me. I'm genuinely happy in a way I wasn't sure I'd ever feel again after the divorce. Proud of myself for recognizing when enough was enough and walking away from someone who was dragging me down. This life I have now, with financial security and healthy relationships and a home that's actually mine, is worth more than any toy collection or broken promise ever could be. So, tell me honestly, if you were in my shoes, faced with that kind of betrayal, would you have done what I did? Or would you have found a different way to reclaim your life? I'm really curious to hear what you all think.